inside the Borg and free from the hive mind, this is Rex Bear hosting Leak Project. The Leak Project was created to offer awareness and information not found in the mainstream news. With over 90% of the world's media controlled by only 6 enormous conglomerates, many people today are looking for more accurate information. The Leak Project offers a refreshing approach to the brain-drained media. Check back daily for new content as we thrive to bring you the cutting edge in news, current events, on-scene video footage, interviews, and most importantly, the truth.
All right. Well, tonight's guest is Dane Wigington, the leading researcher for geoengineeringwatch.org. Mr. Wigington has investigated all levels of geoengineering, from chemtrails to HAARP. He assisted Michael Murphy with his production of What in the World Are They Spraying, and has appeared on an extensive number of interviews to explain the environmental dangers we are facing right now on a global level. Dane focused his efforts and energy on the geoengineering issue when he began to lose very significant amounts of solar uptake due to ever-increasing solar obstruction caused from the aircraft spraying mass amounts of chemicals into the clouds and into the skies. He also began testing health from the forest, and his research in geoengineering will surely change your perception about what is going on right now. Dane, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rex. Very grateful that you're helping us to expose this issue that should be everybody's logical priority if we're to secure any future for ourselves and our posterity.
Well, it's pretty wicked, Dane. I'll tell you, I travel the country extensively, and everywhere I go, whether I am in South Carolina or whether I'm in Washington State, I see mass amounts of chemicals being blasted into the skies. And people used to use the excuse of, oh, those are just contrails. That's typical from any airplane. But when I started to explain to them, watch the X patterns and the checkerboard patterns, and then you'll see a blue sky turn into a very hazy, overcast sky in a matter of 15 minutes, it really started to wake some people up. So if you could tell the audience, first off, why you decided to start exposing this stuff and the research and knowledge you have behind it, and then we can move on further into exactly what it's doing and what we can do to hopefully stop it.
Well, it's certainly not a job I wanted, and I've never been involved with anything politically, never been an activist, but my background with Bechtel Power Corporation, my home on the cover of the largest renewable energy magazine, I'm completely off-grid in the woods of Northern California. So, as you mentioned before, as I started to lose so much solar power from whatever these aircraft were emitting, I mean, clearly something was going on. We had grid patterns one day and nothing the next, and the actual amount of aircraft in the air would be 10 times more on these grid pattern days. So there was a mountain of geoengineering/climate engineering data out there. And by the way, for your listeners, the semantics are really important with this issue. You want to rely on those terms, climate engineering and geoengineering, because if you're passing the data on to others, and you use the chemtrails term, leads straight to Wikipedia conspiracy theory definition. For a lot of people, that's the end of their investigation. So semantics are important, but in any event, with this mountain of data, I continued my investigation, looking for the primary elements named in numerous geoengineering patents, aluminum oxide being the most primary element. Did not want to find it in my rain, Rex. I truly didn't. I didn't want this to be what it appeared to be. But from an initial rain reading, it's tested at a state-certified lab, 7 parts per billion, and that was already high, according to local experts, hydrogeologists, given my filtered forested location. And subsequent rain tests over the next 5 years, the aluminum escalated as much as 50,000%, up to 3,450 parts per billion. So when you're faced with what can only be described as an all-out assault from the sky against everything you hold dear, the forest lands around you, the environment, your children's health, your health, what does one do? You fight. When you're standing on the end of the plank, there's nowhere else to go, nowhere to hide. You stand and be counted. So that's how I got into this battle. And for those that don't understand what climate engineering is, it's an attempt to manipulate the Earth's climate system, and a stated purpose on the great majority of the patents is SRM, solar radiation management, to try to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. The paradox is, although they can and do create large-scale cooling events, as we have seen in the eastern North American continent all winter long, it comes at the cost of a worsened overall warming. Why should this be a surprise? When the heat reflecting particles reflect both directions, it traps heat in addition to reflecting heat. So this is just simply a total runaway juggernaut of insanity, military-industrial complex. Why would we expect otherwise? The problem now is this is not just another environmental issue. The consequences will be total for life on planet Earth if these programs continue. And even if we can stop them, we have unimaginable challenges ahead. It's not just geoengineering that's harming the Earth's biosphere. Putting 90 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere a day is a problem. It's definitely a problem. Any who believe it's not a problem have not done any research. But that being said, geoengineering is a bigger problem. even bigger than the CO2, for sure. It's disabling the planet's ability to respond to the damage being done, and it's poisoning the entire web of life in the process. So you can see we're painted into quite a dark corner, Rex.
Well, it sounds quite horrific, especially the way that you're painting the picture. About a year ago, I was asking around to some of my friends in different parts of the country and, explaining to them what I was seeing and asking if they were also seeing, the X patterns, the checkerboard patterns in the sky, and they were. So the question is, if this is so detrimental on the Earth, and if it's causing forests and plants problems because of the chemicals that are being sprayed, why are they allowed to do it?
That's always the real pressing question for everybody who looks at this issue, because it's so hard for a rational mind to try to comprehend what an unrational mind will do. So if we look at past examples, when the most pristine places on the planet, South Sea Islands like the Marshall Islands, were literally taken over, the inhabitants booted out, and the islands used for absolutely lethal atomic experimentation. So here we have, again, one of the most beautiful places on the planet utterly obliterated because no one could stop them. And so, and those particular tests, and by the way, they've detonated more than 2,000 nuclear weapons on planet Earth. Everything is contaminated from that. Everything, including everybody who is orchestrating this. Those at the top, also contaminated. Can't avoid this. Strontium-90s in all of our bones. Now we look at depleted uranium, which is used as ammunition now for the NATO countries, specifically the U.S. We've contaminated huge parts of the globe from that, contaminated forever for all practical purposes, 4.5 billion year half-life with depleted uranium. We can look at this from so many different angles. Project Starfish, which was the detonation of hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere, to see what would happen. Let's detonate absolutely unbelievable explosives in the magnetosphere to see what would happen. So we're not dealing with sanity. That's something people have to get through their mind, and also look at this from the standpoint of those in power. When they can't let go of that power, they can't get enough power. It's an addict. How many addicts do you know that can get enough of the drug? They can't. So in the course of trying to exercise this power and control, which they've had because we have a completely complacent population around the globe, populations that are fat, happy, American Idol, golfing, McDonald's, football games, they're happy. So they're happy for the moment, not for long. The Happy Meals will be going away soon. But as this complacent population has looked the other way and pretended that this wasn't their problem, now it's all of our problem. As Eisenhower warned so incredibly accurately so long ago, that the military-industrial complex would pose a dire threat. Indeed, it has. And now, again, we have passed the point of no return in many aspects for the planet we've known. We're past that point. So in the course of 60-plus years of experimentation with these programs, they've done horrific damage that can't be undone in any time frame that matters. So now we're looking at trying to salvage a planet that supports life, period. It will be nothing like the planet we've known. And any who doubt this, again, I've had a lot of resistance in recent years, Rex, with people who have been confused, understandably confused, by the headlines, by the cold events back east. But people need to stand back and look at how are these cold events happening, and is the whole world as cold as the eastern U.S.? And the answer on the cold part is no. If you look at a lot of the data we post, and I post GISS maps often, where you can see the only cold place on planet Earth is eastern North America and a few spots in South America where they're geoengineering heavily as well. The rest is in meltdown. In fact, Rex, did you see the headlines from NASA from 3 days ago on the Arctic ice situation? Did you see that?
Yes, I did. Absolutely, I did.
For your listeners, I'll read a headline for you right now. Grim news from NASA. West Antarctica's entire flank collapsing toward the Southern Ocean. At least 15 feet of sea level rise already locked in worldwide. That's a headline. Now, let's look at the week before. NASA's official position was max 2 feet of sea level rise in the next 100 years, max. So in a week, we went from 2 feet to 15 feet. And the 15 feet is just as ridiculous an estimate as the 2 feet, because the actual trajectory we are on is for much, much more than that. To say 15 feet is guaranteed, Rex, would be like saying if you jump off a 240-foot cliff, stop magically 15 feet down. Why would you stop? What's going to stop you? And in this case, people don't realize how much ice there is in the cryosphere. You have about 190-plus feet of potential sea level rise built into Antarctica, 21 to 24 feet in Greenland, another 10 to 15 feet in the rest of the Earth's glaciers, 230, 240 feet total, complete alteration of the coastlines around the planet. So, again, the ramifications go much further. We know that geoengineering is shredding the ozone layer. Posted an article about this today. In fact, when I first posted data on this, and anybody who has any sensitivity can tell the sun is way, way hotter than it should be. And to put that into perspective, we know.
Yes, definitely.
You guys feel that? You guys have felt that, right? Okay, so, I mean, we knew it was hotter. We knew the effect from the science, available science. When you put particulates in the atmosphere, you shred ozone, period. A volcano shreds ozone, period. Particulates do this. So it causes a chlorine molecule reaction with this type of particulate that high up. So we knew it was bad. We didn't know how bad. We bought meters, state-of-the-art meters, metering in California, Maine, Oregon, New Mexico. We now know UVB levels, the more lethal band, are at least 1,200% higher than we're being told. Wow. That's not a little bit, yeah. It's burning the bark off of trees. It's killing plankton. By the way, in the plankton count, 50% down globally. Plankton supplies 50% to 60% of the Earth's oxygen content. Again, the chain reaction is huge. We're seeing, did you guys see that the anchovy fleets came back last week with nothing?
Yes, I did.
You guys are ahead of the game. I mean, most people don't notice this stuff. So food chain is collapsing right now in the ocean. It's absolutely collapsing. So the point is, I do paint a bleak picture, but I would try to instill this in people that if anybody doesn't say it like it is at this late date, we don't have any chance. And if we're an example I often use, you guys, if you're standing in the middle of the interstate, you're better off facing traffic. If you turn your back to traffic, you don't have a chance. So, if everybody faced this issue, got up, got involved, got educated, and started spreading the word, and we brought this to the light of day, it would cause a shockwave around the globe, and it's the single biggest victory we could have that would change the flavor of what we face. Not make us all live happily ever after, but it would change the flavor of what we face.
Right. It's funny, too, because I was first told about chemtrails probably about 6 years ago. And when I was told about it, I was somewhat skeptical. I've always, you could say, have been somewhat of a conspiracy theorist. I've always thought for myself, so I've always appreciated a good conspiracy. At the same time, I'm a skeptic. But when I was told about it, I started to do some research, and the more I looked up into the sky, the more I could see these particular patterns that planes would do. And when you see the X patterns or the checkerboard patterns, that's typically when you know that they're chemtrails and not just your standard contrail, which dissipates over just a few minutes. So I started to tell people to look up in the skies, and now they start to see it, and they're aware of it. What I would think would be great is I know of a few of the reasons they do chemtrails, Dane, but with your research, what exactly are they doing besides manipulating the weather?
Well, there's a lot of aspects to this, and let me back up a little bit. In regard to the skepticism, I can appreciate that. And even with my background of looking up, if you will, because of the renewable aspect, I was skeptical too, because I just felt, if this was going on, how could I have not seen it? How could it really be going on at the scale? And it's astounding how few people look up. And truly, I've said this before, but it holds water. You could light the sky on fire and a lot of people wouldn't notice. So we need to get them to look up fast, or we'll have nothing left to save. Next, on the definition of a chemical trail or a condensation trail, many people are still, even in this movement, are still confused as to even these shorter, brighter trails that seem to dissipate are still particulate disbursements. The colors absolutely are not anything that we would associate with condensation with some of these trails. And we know from the type of jet engine that's used on all commercial aircraft and all military tankers, it's called a high bypass turbofan jet engine. We have a 20-minute tutorial with animations on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. This engine by design is nearly incapable of producing any trail because 80% of the air that passes through it is non-combusted. And we know this is the case because we can see these trails, even some of the shorter ones, that suddenly disappear. They're gone. And we know, again, from spectrometry that you have colors that shouldn't be coming out of an engine with anything associated with combustion. And we have days where we have these shorter, brighter trails that seem to dissipate, but the skies become ever more silvery white. And again, this is one way of ionizing the atmosphere. It makes the atmosphere more conductive. So it's not always about blocking sun. There are other aspects of the spraying. In addition, when there's cloud cover over areas, a lot of people think that the only form of geoengineering or chemtrail spraying, if you will, try to stay away from that term, but the only form of that is horizon-to-horizon trails on an otherwise clear day. That's the tip of the proverbial iceberg. Much more engineering takes place over the poles and over existing cloud cover. So on days like California's frying right now, you guys know that, right? You've seen some of the information, perhaps. 100 degrees. It was 101 or 2 in Northern California today with very low humidities. Everything's dying. And we see this type of spraying going on, these shorter trails. And what it appears they're doing is just simply making the atmosphere more conductive, and some of the spray applications appear to be to create a lens effect, because we actually see higher UV levels on these days than an otherwise completely clear day with no visible trails at all. the UV is actually higher on days like this where we get this silvery white haze, and it appears to be a lens effect. And we see.
Why would they do that?
I'll lead up to that. It's a good question. We see during these same periods, like now, spraying at night as well, which we know traps radiant heat. Why would they trap the heat? Why would they try to build the heat? We've had this the last 3 Mays in a row, because it appears that's how they increase the strength of a high-pressure zone, massively strong high pressure, which everybody knows has been over the west. So that spins clockwise in the northern hemisphere, which is more or less a pulley for the jet stream. So they don't allow the jet stream to come into the west coast because that would push too much warm air, too much warm moisture, that it appears they're trying to pump up through the higher latitudes up into Alaska most of the winter. Did you guys know Alaska had the warmest January on record? Did you know that?
No, but I was out there last July, and they were blasting the skies like crazy then.
I believe it. So while the eastern U.S. was in the freeze,
I remember. I was in it.
Yeah, in the east. So Alaska had the warmest January on record, and we just had the third warmest March on record, second warmest April on record. This is all globally. So they pump that moisture up to Alaska and spray it and ice nucleate it, try to cool it down, and then pump it down into the east to create some cooling headlines, confuse everybody. The world's cold. Al Gore's a hypocrite, which he is. I mean, there's no arguing that. How can he do what he did and have stock in BP and ExxonMobil? But people have to get past Al Gore. They have to look at reality. And right now the geoengineers and the media are trying to create the perception of cold mixed in with all the warm, so people are confused and they don't realize just how far off the plank we are.
So Dan, I got to jump in here real quick. I'm sorry.
Anytime. I'm sorry.
This has been a total bipolar winter, I like to call it, when people say, oh, what a crazy winter. Yeah, it's bipolar. One day it's super hot, then one day it's super cold. Are you saying that is because the geoengineers are trying to fool the populace into thinking that, oh, we're not going into global warming, it's still global cooling?
Now, yes, and let's back up a little bit. Did the power structure formerly want to be sure that we knew there was global warming? Yes. Did they want to make sure of that because they had an agenda of carbon credits and so forth? Yes. Did they change course in the last few years? Yes. Anybody who watches the Weather Channel would know this. It was absolute theater all winter long, very theatrically named winter storms. Did you guys see any of the Weather Channel named storms? The last one was Zephyr, Hercules, right the first year is Winter Storm Hercules. Extremely theatrical stuff. The whole Weather Channel show, owned by Rothschilds, by the way, who's also connected to Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and so forth. But their job, it was so incredibly clear, was to paint the picture of a frozen Earth. They weren't covering the 85-degree weather on the West Coast, dry reservoirs. They weren't covering any of that. They weren't covering Siberia burning to the ground, which, by the way, Siberia started burning in April of this year. It's normally frozen solid till June. The temperatures of 80 degrees, temperatures in the Arctic 40 degrees above normal. They're not covering any of that. But what they are doing very successfully is convincing a lot of the population that everybody who thinks it's warming has to be mad. And so even with the climate engineering issue, people, it tends to make them not take that seriously either. It's a way for the same people who control fossil fuel industry are the same people who are involved with geoengineering. We have direct connections with fossil fuel industry people and climate engineering people. Why wouldn't they be connected? So at this point, it's just an effort to try to hide the severity of the problem, keep the status quo as long as possible, keep the herd from panicking while they're digging in. And they are literally digging in. We have photos of the tunnel boring machines they're using to carve a huge network of underground facilities going on right now. We have 2.2 billion rounds of ammunition ordered by Homeland Security. You guys know that, right?
Oh, yeah, and they've also got cardboard cutouts of, grandma and grandpa and, little kids with guns. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, the biggest threat now is a Caucasian 80-year-old woman.
There you go. So, I mean, and we look at other examples, too, and an example I like to give, it's so parallel, the Gulf oil spill. Do you guys remember Corexit that was used there? The toxic chemical oil disbursement?
Oh, yeah, that stuff's worse than the oil.
There you go. You guys are way ahead of most people at this point. And so Corexit, by some of the EIRs, the environmental impact reviews, made that situation 52 times more toxic. But they don't care because the goal was to hide the situation. In fact, there's some reports that Corexit is still being sprayed near the wellhead and near some of the fissures to keep that oil on the bottom of the Gulf where people can't see it. Now, again, you have to wonder, why did all the hurricanes stop in the Gulf? And they stopped. They will not let anything rotate there. They absolutely have the ability to suppress cyclonic rotation. We have patented substances for this called Dynomat, and there's other substances as well. We see them knock cyclonic rotations down every time they start in the Gulf. They don't want that stirred up. So right now, it's just an effort to hide the severity of things as long as possible while they're digging in and while all hell's about to break loose. And did you guys see the comment by the French foreign minister that was made today?
I have not, no.
No.
A French foreign minister standing beside John Kerry, and I don't know whether this was a slip or not. I just posted on this a few minutes ago, but he said, quote, "We have 500 days till climate chaos." That's a pretty direct statement from somebody in his position. Now, we could argue we already have climate chaos right now, but what people need to understand, this is an extremely non-linear equation. You can't look backward and say it's taken this long to get here, so it's going to take that long to get there. It's spinning out of control wildly by the day. So that's a pretty powerful statement. We're certainly posting it everywhere, and the cat is starting to get out of the bag, if you will. They can't suppress this much longer. They can't hide these programs much longer. And I'm hearing from people that I thought I would never hear from. I mean, yesterday I got a phone call from an insurance agent that always repeats the official narrative, and he called me and finally had completely woken up. He's livid. He wants to tell his church and everybody else that he's with, and he's 100% on board now, So at the point in time, they can't hide this from the population. The population knows that, Granny's Alzheimer's and Junior's autism came from this, and their whole world has been poisoned and their climate's torn apart. You're not going to have a happy village.
Well, and it seems as if that's why they continue to pump out these chemicals in the food and the water and the mind-controlled television programming to keep people dumbed down. So it's as if a slow kill, you've got a frog in a pot in warm water that's eventually going to boil, and by the time that happens, it's too late.
You guys are absolutely on target with everything. And when I relate all this to the effort to try to hide the damage done to the climate while doing more at the same time, and I'm not omitting the eugenics aspect of this, because certainly when we know that they know how lethal these materials are, they know, obviously. We have studies from the Air Force in the late 90s on nanoparticulates. They know what synergistic toxicity is. You start blending all these metals together, they're exponentially worse than any of these metals individually. And they're doing it. They're doing everything to hide it. And one can only look at that as a form of eugenics. And it appears from pretty credible research. I know Clifford. You guys know Clifford Carnicom, probably, who he is. You've heard of Clifford before?
I have not, no.
The Carnicom Institute. He's a very credible PhD researcher, and they are finding what they have described to me as engineered pathogens in the samples they are taking. Pathogens that exhibit signs of a fungus but are not a fungus, signs of bacteria but are not anything like anything they've seen before. So,
like designer type.
Yes, engineered. Yeah. Engineered. So why would we think this isn't going on? We have 12.5 publicized episodes of the U.S. government routinely experimenting on innocent populations. Why in the world do we think they're not doing it now? They are, clearly.
Well, let me ask you this. We've talked about some of the geoengineering aspects and how even on a day that seems cloudy or hazy, the amount of UV rays that are within the atmosphere are even worse than on a typical sunny day. And I know so many people will talk about, the sun feels warmer on their skin, it seems brighter. And if this system of chemtrails or, whatever, geoengineering, whatever you want to call it, whatever the proper term is, I'm just going to say chemtrails because all of our listeners know what chemtrails are and they're very well educated. So, it reminds me of the movie Highlander too, where they destroyed the ozone, so they had to create a false ozone. But if we're continuing to go down this path and it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse, if we stop spraying, will the ozone be able to rebuild itself?
To some degree, the ozone layer will. And if I can back up a hair on the term chemtrails, and your listeners, I'm sure you have many astute listeners, and I completely agree that chemtrails is a more accurate term. It is, because that's what we're talking. It's not that I'm phobic of the term in and of itself. I'm not. It's very descriptive. But if we want to gain traction in this fight, if we want to gain ground, we have to play in a manner that they can't deal with. So that's why I state those terms are important. But getting past that, will the planet recover to what we've known? No. All available data makes that abundantly clear. We have entered a realm that's uncharted territory, but we do have enough paleo data to have some reasonable comparisons. We have methane spewing from the Arctic right now. We have methane spewing from every fracking site around the globe as well. But the reservoirs that are in the Arctic are gigantic. And to put this in perspective, it's not in the East Siberian Shelf of the Arctic. There may be as much as 10,000 gigatons of methane hydrate on the seafloor. If only 1/2 of 1% of that releases, that's a 400% increase to the total warming on the planet so far. That should put it into perspective. There's enough methane there to exterminate life on Earth many, many times over, dozens of times over. If that methane gets out, it's game over. It's spewing right now. And again, let's tie this back to geoengineering, because the anthropogenic activity is a problem. People need to understand you can't have a fire without heat. And when we put 20 million years of hydrocarbon back into the atmosphere, that's absolutely a problem. But if they had not geoengineered for the last 60 years, the planet would have been responding the whole time, trying to respond. The forest would be thriving instead of dying. And the hydrological cycle would be radically increased instead of completely decreased because of the particulates. It starts the hydrological cycle. So the planet would be in much better shape, even with the CO2, if it weren't for the spraying. But the geoengineering alters upper-level wind currents. And so what they've done, you guys may not remember, in 2012, an El Nino was starting, but it appears they successfully suppressed that by keeping the high-pressure dome over California, pushing offshore winds, altering the trade winds, pushing that warm water back to the western Pacific and holding it in. Well, you can only keep a pot on a boiling kettle so long. Now we're looking at a monster El Nino event that will push global temperatures completely off the charts. And they've also, by changing these upper-level wind currents, that then has changed ocean currents pushing warm water up the eastern seaboard and into the Arctic. Melting methane hydrates on the seafloor. Methane migrates to the surface, starts to cover the planet like a layer of glass. Methane, you guys may have heard methane's 20 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas.
I have heard that. Wow.
Okay, now that's what the scientific community puts out. But let's put it in perspective. That's over a 100-year time horizon. Over a 10-year time horizon, methane is 100 times more potent than CO2. 100 times more. Over a 1-year time horizon, 170 to 180 times more potent. So we're talking about a complete game changer. It's happening now. Let's add the shredded ozone layer. Let's add the dying forests that are now emitting carbon instead of absorbing carbon. All these roads, in one form or another, and very directly, in most cases, lead to geoengineering. They lead to climate engineering. So this is the pharmaceutical approach to planet Earth that is literally going to kill our host if it continues.
Well, and it's as if all this is being done for material gains. The more you talk about what is going on, taking place, the fracking, getting the oil out of the earth, etc. So with all that you're talking about, this is obviously multiple levels of destruction on the planet. Combine that with the nuclear fault lines, or the nuclear reactors next to fault lines. The fault line is to go what happens to the nuclear reactor and the isotopes and the depleted uranium. So now, as far as HAARP is concerned and the actual control of the weather, have you done any research into any patents on weather modification where it can actually cause a tornado or a hurricane or some type of winter giant hailstorm or something like that?
Yes. I mean, this is another aspect of the geoengineering programs. It's inseparable from the spraying. The ionosphere heaters, so your listeners understand what this is. HAARP, a lot of people have heard the term, but they don't know what the acronym is. It's High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. But that is really not an accurate description of that facility. It's an ionosphere heater. We believe there's at least 26 large ground-based facilities like the one in Alaska. There's an unknown number of smaller RF transmitters. We see them on the radar regularly. In fact, I post images of this. Dutch Sense posts some good images of this. So the planet is literally covered with these radio frequency transmitters. Now, in the case of the larger installations like HAARP in Alaska, the publicized data says they can heat the ionosphere to 15,000 degrees Fahrenheit or more because of an electrical chain reaction. And this facility has 3 billion watts of power. It's utter insanity. They're tearing holes in the atmosphere. Now, as they heat the atmosphere, that can create low-pressure zones. That can help steer the jet stream. And then we add all the other facilities. We add the type of high-pressure buildup that I mentioned earlier in the show, and it's like pulleys on the front of a car engine where you see the fan belt spinning this way and that way around all these pulleys. And that's exactly what they're doing with the jet stream. So they can pump it south. You guys mentioned the massive temperature swings. We're seeing that everywhere. While LA was 100-plus degrees today, there was snow falling for a brief period. I'm not sure if anybody officially reported it, but it showed up on radar in Colorado Springs at 57 degrees. Well, one, how does it snow at 57 degrees with artificial chemical nucleation? But we see this type. They're desperate to create the appearance of winter in some places to cool things down, which the artificial chemical nucleation does temporarily. But at this point, go ahead.
A couple months ago, there was a lot of snow in the northeast and the eastern part of the U.S., and there was a lot of hysteria claiming that this snow not only smelled like plastic, but when it was burnt, it burnt like plastic, and it was black as well.
Correct. And these people were not imagining this. We know that there are endothermic reacting chemicals and metals in snow samples. We've taken lab tests. So at any given location, with any particular disbursement, we can't know what was in that particular mix because there's biological nucleating agents and chemical, and metal. So in the case of barium hydroxide and ammonium, that can drop lab temperatures up to 100 degrees in a beaker. I did an article called Engineered Snowstorms, What's in It? Or what are they spraying? I think it's the name of the article. If people look up engineered snowstorms, they'll find plenty. And I put lab tests in there so people can see this with their own eyes. They can see these elements added in a beaker, barium added with ammonium, instant freeze. They can see another lab test also posted, same article, 2 minutes, short videos. They can see biological nucleating agents added to a large vessel of water, freezes it instantly. Instantly. They can turn it upside down, nothing falls out. People don't understand how powerful some of these elements they have are. They're patented. We have the patents again. So we saw pond water in Northern California at temperatures, pond water temperatures at 40 degrees, we saw ice. And temperatures, nighttime lows 40 degrees, daytime high 65, we had ice for 3 weeks. Did you guys see the big ice balls in Lake Michigan? Okay, this is a phenomenon that's only 3 years old. Doesn't anybody wonder why this is happening? Same thing. They're nucleating the hell out of the surface of bodies of water to create the illusion of a frozen planet. And it's cold. I don't want to insinuate it's not cold on the ground. If you guys also remember, I did an article on this too. You remember the 100,000 cattle that died in South Dakota early October last year? Media didn't cover it much, so it's not surprising you didn't catch it. But October 4th last year in Dakota, 100,000 cattle died from a snowstorm.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you guys remember that now. So now I captured the maps from that time because the maps got scrubbed offline pretty fast, but I have them in an article called Engineered Snowstorms Begin Again. And on the maps, you can see clearly, these are NOAA maps, there was temperatures of 85 and rain in Chicago, 89 and rain in Kansas City, and 45 degrees in snow in Dakota. So how can that kill 100,000 cattle?
I do. Absolutely, I do.
You remember it now? Yeah. So the endothermic reaction that happens with this material against the cow's hide could absolutely kill it. We're talking about extremely cold temperatures if you're touching the material. And we see the same thing with plants. Plants that are extremely cold hardy are showing up chemically frostburnt all over the country with temperatures that weren't necessarily that cold. So it creates a cold layer on the ground, just as any chemical ice like dry ice would. And the snow, back to your original question, it sublimates, which means it turns from a solid to a gas and bypasses the liquid phase. And that's exactly what people saw. It's exactly what they saw. So, and then people call in and say, well, their snow was different. Well, it's not going to be the same everywhere. It depends on, where they've released this material. But that's how desperate they are. The snowstorms are chemically nucleated. And if you guys have watched the snowstorms this winter, they were pumping moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and turning into a, quote, winter storm. Since when? Since when do we have winter storms originating from the Gulf of Mexico? And there would always be an ice storm boundary between the thunderstorms and lightning storm boundary and then some snow starts because it takes a while to transition it. Does that make sense?
It does. And I got to jump in here real quick, too, because this reminds me back in the Fukushima disaster, 3/11/11, March 11th, 2011. Talk about numerology there. Do the numbers on that. But anyway, there was that giant tidal wave and that earthquake. So do you have any evidence pointing to that was created by a false flag?
Yeah, I have some personal evidence on that, and it's hard for people to get their arms around that being possible. And if I didn't have the experience I had happen, I would, maybe still be slightly skeptical. But one, we know that when you generate that kind of power, like the HAARP facilities can generate, and you bounce it off the atmosphere as you can when the atmosphere has been made conductive and reflective by the spraying, and you push those signals right back down to the surface of the planet, it causes vibrations. And even very low power survey equipment, this is how they really discovered this technology, that was used in certain seismically sensitive areas, was triggering tremors. Equipment with 100 watts of power, very low power. Let's imagine what 3 billion watts of power can do in a seismically sensitive zone. So the technology absolutely appears to be real, that they can indeed trigger seismic activity. My personal experience was I was called by someone who knew of my research, who lived on the California coast, and was told by a relative, this is the Tuesday before the Friday of the quake. They were told, they asked me, had I heard anything that would cause me to believe that they should be away from the coast on that Friday because their relative and Army intelligence told them to be away from the coast. Now, I'm glad my wife heard it because she would have never believed it. And I didn't think twice about it because you hear things a lot. And you can imagine my shock when I turned the TV on Friday morning and saw what had happened. So to add more credence to this, General Burt Stubblebine is a friend. He's the highest-ranking U.S. general to speak out about 9/11. And General Burt has shared with me what he understands from Pentagon connections he has. They intended the quake. They did not intend Fukushima. And, this is the sort of...
I'm here.
Right.
Yep.
Correct. I think they cut him off. He was getting ready to talk about Fukushima, and they cut him off.
They cut him off this time.
Let's call him back.
Let's give him a call back. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a slight delay here. It looks like the Men in Black or somebody decided to cut out.
Let's see.
Or maybe it was just a coincidence. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, just a coincidence. Hey, are you with us?
Just I'm here now.
Yeah.
Click, gone. So I'll pick up where I left off. So how do you have a trigger an event like that? That again, there was a plasma cloud also reported. Did you guys know that there was by two universities reported on a lot of the radar images a plasma cloud over the zone where the quake went off? Did you guys know that?
Yeah.
I remember about one of them. I didn't hear about two.
So again, all the dots connect, and you had Japan was starting to make signs of perhaps allying with its regional partners. So there's no coincidences here. Philippines, you guys remember Cyclone Haiyan, right? The big
that was a couple years ago? Or was that recently?
It was only it was last hurricane season. It was several months ago. It cut a swath through the Philippines with
that's right.
record winds.
That's right. Yes.
So that cyclone very, very anomalously intensified radically right before landfall. Very anomalous. Normally they would start to decrease. So it cuts a swath through the Philippines. The U.S. shows up in full force under, quote, humanitarian pretext. And now guess what? They're setting up military bases there. What a surprise. And we see the same thing over and over. Pardon me?
Didn't that happen in Haiti? Wasn't there something set up like
same thing, similar circumstances, exactly. Humanitarian pretext, now there's bases. It's been happening for decades. The droughts in Africa, all over Africa, appear to be completely climate-engineered droughts. We know these programs are going on absolutely positively. So they drought the country to their knees, and they force them to allow U.S. occupation, period.
Well,
so
I'm sorry, please continue. I just wanted to, when you're done with that, how about Monsanto signing over and getting particular seeds that are supposed to be more prone to grow under aluminum and other chemicals?
You're correct. Monsanto has aluminum-resistant, UV-resistant, and drought-resistant seeds now. Monsanto appears to be nothing more than a buzzard feasting off the carcass in this case. I mean, they are certainly a part of this cabal of insanity. I don't believe they're near the top rung of the ladder by any means, but they are trying to capitalize on it. But all their technology won't mean anything when the planet no longer supports life. That is exactly where we're headed, and we're headed there at lightning speed. Like, again, right now, the best available data gives us a very short time horizon in the northern hemisphere, slightly longer in the southern hemisphere. That's based on solid graphing of current data. When you hear these reports from NASA that says we could have a 2-degree C temperature rise by the end of the 21st century, that's completely fictitious. They could pull it out of a hat. We're there now. In fact, everywhere we check, they're falsifying data to the downside. Again, 4 and 5 degrees to the downside. I challenge anybody to watch your temperature, see if the official reading was lower than what you actually saw in your thermometer. So we're looking right now, based on current trajectories from very credible people. Guy McPherson is really a primary person. He's professor from UC Arizona, part of the Arctic Methane Emergency Group. We're looking at perhaps a 10-degree C temperature rise in the next decade and a half, and that's about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Try to get your arms around that. No life exists then. So if the planet's not allowed to respond, and fast, it's game over. It's game over. And people who think civilization will continue as it is, they're living in a fantasy. It won't. It's in its death throes right now. It was never sustainable. It's in the process of collapsing. You have chaos in about 35, 36 countries around the globe right now, increasing by the day. Resource wars going on in the Middle East, while people are watching Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky's story resurrected. Pretty scary.
Yeah, there's been other cases too, Dane, of like Magellan's disease, different nanoparticulates being sprayed from the skies. Have you done any tracking, or have you traced down any of these Magellans to stuff being sprayed from the skies?
Again, it appears there's a lot of biological testing going on, and this is also where I encourage people, if they have symptoms that they think are related to Morgellons, they should look up Clifford Carnicom, the Carnicom Institute. That's where the best research is now. Yes, it appears to be related, and again, once you open up the Pandora's box of brew of metals and chemicals, some known, many more likely unknown, then it's anybody's guess as to what will happen in the human organism. There's 60 lab tests from Norway with Norwegian researchers that I work with that all showed fluoride. So these are precipitation tests. So it appears they're spraying fluoride. Now, I mention often it's an important example, and it's one of the few studies we have. In the case of, let's take aluminum and mercury. We all have mercury in us, no question about that. We all have aluminum in us now, no question about that. In the case of these two metals, we do have studies that show a synergistic toxicity increase of as much as 10,000%. So we're not talking about a little worse, we're talking about a lot worse. Now let's add barium, a known immune suppressant, manganese, copper. We're getting copper in our snow tests now, and copper is known to be used as an ice nucleating agent. We have actually Popular Science reported, and I'm not sure they were supposed to. When you get things this out of control, sometimes one branch of the establishment says something they're not supposed to say, but Popular Science publicized they're finding E. coli bacteria at 33,000 feet. What the hell is that doing up there? You know, we normally have syringe, which is a known cloud microorganism, but not E. coli. And this is where it gets more interesting. E. coli has been used for experimentation with artificial ice nucleation. So does 2 and 2 equal 4? It seems to. And so we don't know what we're being exposed to at this point. We really don't. But it's not good. The things we do know of is bad enough.
Well, and let me ask you this. There's, nanotechnology just getting to be incredible now. Have you seen any direct evidence of some type of nanotechnology that could actually be triggered inside of the body to cause, let's say a heart attack or a stroke or some type of brain aneurysm?
Yes, I've looked at some of that data, and I believe that there's credibility to some of that. I'm often cautious to go too far into it, just for the fact that your listeners are probably more up to speed. A lot of the radio shows I'm doing now, I'm trying to get at the non-choir shows so that we wake up those that are still fast asleep. But I'm sure your listeners are more up to speed. Yes, that technology does appear to exist. I question how effective it is, and also the electronically stimulated biotech that could be even some sort of engineered organism, not necessarily mechanical, that can be made more virulent when exposed to the right radio frequency. There is research in these areas. Why would we expect them not to research things this diabolical? Certainly they appear to be. The human organism is extremely powerful if one understands that and one keeps their mental state sound. So for all their engineering, and I don't deny they can engineer pathogens like Ebola that are so incredibly lethal that even the miraculous human body can't fight it off. I don't deny that at all. But at the same time, a lot of these technologies are perhaps not working as well as they thought. And I believe we're seeing, and this is very important, I believe we're seeing a fracturing of the power structure. I believe there are people on the inside now, in whatever way they can, fighting back. And I think that tide is growing, and we need to feed that because, you hear a lot of people that are so upset, understandably so, at these aircraft. You hear people say, well, we need to shoot them down and this kind of thing. That's not going to win our battle. The people flying these aircraft are our military brothers and sisters who are being told they're doing something good. That's what they're being told. But the fact is, obviously, that couldn't be further from the truth. But we need them on our side. We need these people on our side, period. So I talked to a KC-135 pilot, had no idea what he did up there, no idea. And the last information I got about him from a mutual friend was he was medicated behind the desk in an office because he asked questions. That's what we're faced with. So there are so few people at the top, so few running this complete juggernaut of insanity. We have to wake up the masses. We must. It is our only alternative. We need the U.S. military on our side. And if we could get this issue out in the open, if they knew their sons and daughters were sprayed and that what they were doing was literally eliminating any chance for a future for their posterity, I believe the majority would stand with us.
I certainly hope you're right. It's amazing, especially how intelligent some people should be and the levels of professionalism they're supposed to take place in, how, I guess you could say, ignorant, and not in saying that they're stupid, it's just that they're uninformed. They don't have the information that you and I might have just by going to Google and being able to do the research ourselves. So it's quite unfortunate.
I share that to capitalize on what you just said because I completely agree with you. This is where the reality we find ourselves in is so hard to get your arms around. Where the hell are all the PhDs? I put an article up about this from a good group that went into this in more depth. It's astounding how willing the science community is to toe the line for the insanity. It's astounding. They're a very groomed, conditioned group that literally the house is burning to the ground, and they will not admit it unless or until their peer-reviewed, establishment-ordained manual says it is. They will not admit to it. They won't. Again, they could watch a house burning down in front of them, and they would not admit that that's a fire unless or until they're allowed to say so, and unless or until their peer-reviewed, again, establishment-approved manual says it so. Otherwise, it's not reality.
Right. It's like they're so smart, yet they have absolutely no common sense.
And no backbone. Let's add that. I mean, I'm not. There's a few. I know some people in the Union of Concerned Scientists. I know Forest Service biologists, and a few people who I'm very honored to know. But there are a tremendous amount of people, not just in the science community and society as a whole, but most especially in the science community, that have absolutely no spine, that don't seem to understand that we are all going down. The water's coming over the deck right now. It's around our heels, and yet people are still playing shuffleboard or polishing the deck rails, or again watching Monica Lewinsky while the ship is about to roll over and go down. And their attempt to preserve their jobs, and that's what it is with a lot of them. I know that. I've talked to them. I've had USDA soil scientists in the field, pulling up pH readings of the soil that's 15 times further toward alkaline than it was 10 years ago, and sheepishly telling me, well, what do you want us to do about it? We could lose our job. Well, where is your sense of honor? Where is it? How do you look at your children? I don't understand this. I can't understand it because it's impossible to relate to how they could value their job more than any hope of life for their child. I don't understand that. So these people need to find their spine soon, or it's game over.
Well, who's at the top of this, Dane? Who's at the very top levels? If you were going to say, okay, with my research, what I found out is this person, and this person are the ones at the top of the pyramid that somebody needs to get to and convince them that what they are doing is going to be to the demise of everybody and their future generations as well.
You'll never convince them. We're not dealing with sanity. Again, statistically, 4% of the population is clinically insane, clinically psychopathic. 4%. Those people are at the top. You will never convince them. It's the same people who print the money. A lot of people ask, where's all the funding coming from? They have the money printing mechanism to print whatever they want out of thin air. That's literally numbers on a computer. That's why all the wars also, when you take Saddam, he was about to disconnect from the dollar. The dollar is the global reserve currency. Without the dollar being the global reserve currency, the empire falls. So when Saddam made implications that he was going to start trading oil in something other than dollars, he had to go down. Same thing with Gaddafi. Same thing with Iran. Same thing with Assad in Libya. Same thing. So right now you have a very desperate empire that is in its death throes, and you have a whole planet being sucked into the vortex around it with a human race that has lived far beyond any sustainable means. And we face converging catastrophes. But all this being said, as dire as our situation is, this is where people find out what they're made of, who they are and what they stand for. And no matter how bleak the horizon, I believe there's always unknowns that may be in our favor. And no matter what, no matter how steep the mountain is we're climbing, you don't focus at the top that looks impossible to reach. You keep putting one foot in front of you. And right now, the single greatest leap we could take in the right direction is to expose and stop climate engineering. More than anything else, more than GMO foods, even more than Fukushima. And again, I don't underestimate the lethal nature of Fukushima. I mean, that event could end humanity's existence on Earth as well. But if every breath we take is diminishing our ability to think cognitively, and it is, it absolutely is. There's no question about that. Some of us are stronger than others, and some of us are holding up better than others, but all of us are somewhere in between healthy and a diagnosis with a mental ailment, such as dementia or Alzheimer's. We're all on that path. If we can't stop this exposure, we won't have the health or the mental capacity to face any challenge. And that's why, again, that's why I focused on climate engineering. It's not something that felt comfortable or near and dear to my heart. It's simply, this is the battle that you must win or all is lost.
Geez. Well, you certainly have painted a very bleak picture for myself and our listeners, Dane.
If you guys need, you guys are exceptional hosts, absolutely exceptional. And I just canceled if you want to go any further, I can go a half hour. If you don't, that's fine too. But you guys call.
I'd love to have you. If you can go another half hour, that would be absolutely fantastic. I know our listeners are enthralled that you're on. As much information as you can give us, that'd be great. What else?
I just canceled the phone conference. I just had a phone conference I had. So again, you guys are incredible hosts that get it and that understand what we face, and it's an honor to be here with you guys. And it's people like you that can help to sound the alarm in a way that will mobilize the masses, and we need them to mobilize quickly. So the immediacy of our situation, again, it cannot be overstated. And when you have all the feedback mechanisms kicking into gear right now, this is what people need to try to get through their perception of reality, that everything they see from NOAA, NASA, the modeling, for example, that's done. When people, this is to try to make clear just how distorted the reality people are being fed. Even if they think they're hearing dire data, it's not nearly as dire as what actually is. And we have Raytheon doing all the weather modeling for National Weather Service and NOAA. We have the FAA doing all the modeling we have Lockheed Martin doing all the modeling for the FAA. So you have the weather makers literally telling us what the scheduled weather will be. If you follow me on that, you have defense contractor Raytheon doing all the weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA.
Right.
You have defense contractor Lockheed Martin doing all the weather modeling for the FAA. So you have the people doing the weather modification actually telling the weather disseminating agencies what amounts to what the scheduled weather will be.
So basically the Weather Channel is being promoted by the military-industrial complex.
Well, Weather Channel is another entity. Again, they're just taking what's fed to them from the top, too. They're only script readers at this point. That's all. That's why when you see a report of, quote, mostly sunny, mostly sunny generally means no real clouds, just spray. That's what that report generally means in most areas. But when you have Raytheon, for example, feeding down to National Weather Service and NOAA what the scheduled weather will be, then you have National Weather Service and NOAA feeding down to Weather Channel, local weather forecasts, what the scheduled weather will be. Everybody's on the same page. So they had to control all the agencies. They had to, and they did. And you guys might have seen Monsanto just paid almost $1 billion for a large weather disseminating agency. Did you see that?
No, I didn't. That's news to me. Doesn't surprise me a bit, though.
So you see the scenario, though. They have to control the message. They have to. Otherwise, if you had any sort of independent reporting, you would have a very mixed, chaotic situation.
Well, and also it seems to me that it'd be a lot easier to win a war if you could control the weather. If you could cause a drought or a flood, you could manipulate the food, what crops are going to grow what year. And I want to get into this with you real quick before I forget also, because over the past few years, a couple of years ago in particular, I'm thinking of, there was some really bad tornadoes that also a lot of people died, not from the tornadoes, but from some type of fungus, some designer fungus that was in the tornadoes. Have you gotten any white papers or any information on experiments that the government might be doing with not only weather modification, but also a mixture of some type of fungus on top of that?
As we talked about, certainly it appears from some of the testing that, yes, this sort of experimentation is going on. Now, in regard to fungus, what happens in the human body when you take antibiotics? You kill all the beneficial microorganisms and fungus takes over, yes?
Right, yes.
Same thing in the biosphere, exactly the same thing. So when we have these bioavailable metals coming down, they're highly toxic to everything. They kill the beneficial microbial organisms, and funguses take over. So what do we have? We have a species extinction rate today of 200 plus a day. 200 plus species of plant and animal are going extinct every single day. Now, this is, for a lot of people, if you throw this at them, they're trained to say, well, that's natural. It's just cyclical. Everything goes extinct. But if you take it a step further, 200 a day is 10,000 times the background extinction rate. Nothing normal about that. It's like the change is happening to the planet as a whole. It would be like putting a gun to somebody's head and pulling a trigger and saying it's normal, people die. It's not normal or natural what's happening. So of that 200 species a day, 70 to 80% are fungally related. So again, not only are they experimenting with unknown elements and pathogens, you also have a killing off of all the beneficial microbes from the soils, waters, clouds. There's microbes everywhere on the planet. And so then you have other non-desirable elements taking over, including in the human body. That's why you have, right now you have all these allergy commercials. I mean, everybody's got allergies. Everybody's got COPD. Every other commercial is an allergy commercial. And now they say, if your allergy medicine doesn't work, take this. It's 10 times stronger.
Yeah, just might cause a heart attack or stroke or, suicidal thoughts.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and what do we have? And they're treating things, and they're giving antibiotics for chronic sinusitis, which is now epidemic around the globe. Chronic sinusitis is absolutely epidemic. And now, though, we know from recent studies from the Mayo Clinic that chronic sinusitis is 90 to 95% fungally related, 95% of the time. So you have a medical industry that has no idea what the hell they're doing, treating things in a way that's not only not helpful, it's harmful. I mean, what happens when you have a fungal sinus infection because of whatever we're breathing in, our disabled immune system and so forth, and they give you antibiotics? They destroy whatever immune system you may have had left.
Right. It's like antibiotics obviously can be a double-edged sword. In certain circumstances, they can save your life, and in many circumstances, they're over prescribed, and it does destroy the flora in your body, in your gut.
It does. And where's the immune system start? In the gut.
Exactly.
That's where it starts. If you can't absorb it, you don't have anything left. And so, again, from bottom to top, right now we have a planet on the fast track for what's called Venus syndrome. And again, all your listeners, I hope they look up what I'm saying. I don't want anybody to take anything as a fact that I'm saying. My goal is to get them to investigate. But if we look at, we talked earlier in the show about SRM, right? Solar radiation management, done with SAG, stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, spraying reflective particles into the atmosphere. So that is, to simplify this, goal of SRM is to increase the Earth's albedo, the Earth's reflectivity, in order to reflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy, like we talked about earlier, right? But this is the paradox again, and this is where this starts to look like the pharmaceutical cure gone wrong, and of course there's a lot of other aspects to this, but if we look at Venus has a reflectivity, or an albedo, of, it's 2.5 times greater than Earth, which means Venus is 2.5 times more reflective. That's why it's so bright in the sky. It has a very, very reflective atmosphere. Venus absorbs far less solar energy than the sun. Than the Earth, excuse me. If Venus, all things being equal, Venus would be about 20 to 25 degrees warmer than Earth. But instead it's 900 degrees in the ground. 900. So there's obviously a lot more to a planet that sustains life than just a reflective atmosphere. And this is where the complete insanity of climate engineering is so visible. We have a perfect example, really a sister planet to Earth that had a runaway greenhouse effect. Venus is now thought to have had oceans, but it went through a runaway greenhouse effect, and that's exactly the track we're on right now, a runaway greenhouse effect.
Now, with the research that you've been doing, have you looked for something to help heal the Earth that could be sprayed into the atmosphere as well? I mean, are there particular minerals or compounds that could actually help rebuild the ozone?
The problem with trying to tech our way out of this is there's always a downside. To spray anything in the atmosphere takes something flying, and some of the tankers burn a gallon a second. Try to comprehend that. And a gallon of hydrocarbon burned in the atmosphere can produce, every pound of hydrocarbon, burned in the atmosphere can produce 20 pounds of CO2. So it's a very double-edged sword. The only form of quote-unquote geoengineering that we should be thinking about is things like planting trees. What a perfect organism to help our problem. Trees absorb carbon and they emit oxygen. Why would we be thinking about anything else? Why? I don't know if you guys heard of ocean fertilization. Have you heard of that form of geoengineering?
No, I haven't.
This has been done as well. In fact, this is well publicized. People can look up ocean fertilization. So here's another form of brilliant tech geoengineering, right, which is the epitome of insanity. They dumped something like 50,000 tons of iron oxide into the ocean.
Oh, Lord.
Exactly. I mean, how can that possibly do anything good? And this is well publicized. This is solid fact. So that actually causes an algae bloom in the ocean. Well, that does suck up CO2. It does, a lot of it. But it kills that section of the ocean. Well, how much can that help? So now we have, around the globe, we have over 400 dead zones. These are hypoxic zones where no oxygen is. The largest is in the Gulf of Mexico, 10,000 square miles, but now they're appearing just as big off the coast of China and other areas. So you have huge zones where nothing lives, and these zones are increasing. The ocean is literally, it's stratifying. The atmosphere is stratifying also, so that means it's layering. It's not mixing. And a lot of this can be traced back to climate engineering as well. So there's really no limit to the insanity. And as far as what you said we could do to help heal the planet, the only thing that can be done is to put an end to, I mean, it's a lot of people won't agree with me on this, or they don't want to agree with me, they don't want to believe this, but industrialized society to fail, and there's no way around that. And is there a tech solution on the horizon? No, not that I see. And even production of, again, my background in solar, and obviously I think solar energy is a viable option compared to our other options. But in the production of solar panels, something a lot of people don't know, chemicals used in the production of solar panels, hexafluorethane is 12,000 times more potent to greenhouse gas than CO2. You have another element, nitrogen trifluoride, 17,000 times more potent than CO2. And that's in the production of, quote, green energy. So It's again, I know our equation is incredibly dim. A lot of people don't want to believe what I'm saying. They'll believe it soon because the walls are closing in. But I would argue this again: if we could have a planet that still sustains life, isn't that better than having a Big Mac?
Oh, it certainly sounds like a better way to go to me.
Absolutely.
I don't like Big Macs anyway. You're bringing up a lot of really good points, though, and I got to tell you, most people would really, I feel, are genuinely good people. It's just that many might say, hey, when in Rome, be a Roman. But then, as you're saying, there's not much left of Rome. It's crumbling. So things have to change, obviously.
It has to change. And also, again, I know I have a huge amount of resistance from a lot of people, and I understand this, and I believe they're good people as well, just like I believe there's plenty of good people in the military. They've seen headlines, for example, that stated that the ice in the Arctic had increased by 50% last year. Did you guys see that?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Let me put that into context, if I may. This is how they got that figure. Right now, for the record, by the way, the Arctic ice extent, which is the surface area, not the mass, not the volume, the surface area. Right now, it's the second lowest on record. Well, how did it go from a 50% increase to the second lowest on record? Because even when it had the, quote, 50% increase, it was still the fourth lowest on record.
Right.
How did they get that figure? Well, they took 2012 figure, which was the lowest extent year ever recorded, almost no ice, and they called slush basically the surface of a broken-up ice pack that had been blown out by 3 cyclones into a larger slush pack. They called that ice pack, and they called it 50% expansion. Everybody jumped on board. Ice is expanding, and because people don't like Al Gore, and again, I don't like him at all, at all. But you have to look at hard data. So when they were publicizing a 50% increase in Arctic ice, that was the surface area, the extent, which was like a slushy. The ice volume at that time, same time, was 19% of the 30-year normal, less than a fifth of the 30-year normal. So it's lies on top of more lies on top of more lies. People have to wake up, look around, look at data, smell the coffee. We don't have a lot of time.
Well, and it's interesting how they play the double whammy. First they say you've got global warming, then they turn that into a big conspiracy that there isn't global warming and it's actually global cooling. But in reality, it sounds like there is global warming, maybe not just from gasoline, but just from everything that's been taking place in the Industrial Revolution. So,
and geoengineering and climate engineering as well. I mean, when people look at anthropogenic activity, human activity, and even anti-geoengineering activists need to consider that. Geoengineering is a human activity, which is making the planet warmer.
Right.
So you have to add that in as well. Yes.
Well, and also too, I just want to bring this up, and I'm sure you saw this as well. The Weather Channel finally admitted to geoengineering last year that I saw it on TV, and they were basically talking about it. And before that, there was something on the Discovery Channel saying, what if the government decided to start spraying the skies to geoengineer it because of the global warming, and they made it look like they were doing it to save the people. Once again, as you said, who controls the media?
Well, yeah, they'll put a little bit and piece out there, but here's what they generally do. They'll marginalize it with some ridiculous notion that makes people throw the whole thing out the window. So when they talk about geoengineering, they start talking about space mirrors and hydrogen balloons holding up hoses from the ground in the stratosphere, pumping out materials, things that are totally ridiculous. And so people don't even notice, gee, what about a jet? We've had those for 100 years. Wouldn't that be easier than trying to suspend a hose from the ground into the stratosphere? And so they just tend to try to make it all look ridiculous. They back off, or so people throw the whole thing out the window, if you will, with various red herring. It's just like all the publicized weather modification activities that counties do, states do, with small planes, burning little flares behind the wings. And all that is just an exercise in distraction. So people think they understand what weather modification is. In the meantime, you have these massive climate engineering programs with jets dumping 100-ton payloads that completely negate all these smaller distractionary sort of programs. And back to the heat again, I want to give a few records to people because I want people to understand, again, this is not about carbon credits or any of that nonsense. It's not about Gore or any of that. It's simply about reality. And let me give a few records that people can verify on their own. The continental U.S. in 2012. You guys, no matter where you are, no matter how cold it was this year, do you remember how warm it was the year before?
I do.
Okay. Let me put some statistical data behind that. There were over 50,000 high-temperature records broken in the continental U.S. in 2012. Over 50,000. The warmest year in the U.S. ever recorded by far. 300 and well, then people will say, well, yeah, but there's cold records broken too. Well, how about this? There was 362 all-time temperatures, all-time highs broken In 2012, 0 record lows, 0. We've just passed the 38th consecutive year of above normal global temperatures on planet Earth, 38 years in a row. 346 months in a row of above normal global temperatures. It damn sure is not cooling. And so, again, who would want us to think it's cooling? Who would want us to stay calm, keep the herd passive, and don't let them know that the whole planet is going into meltdown and that, this massive military industrialized society is fueling the fire, starting with climate engineering. Fossil fuel industry, geoengineers, obviously, they can help sell geoengineering to other leaders around the globe if it looks like it works, right? So when they have all these headlines from the U.S. saying, look, we've done this with our populations, we've cooled things down, they all think it's cooling, let us do the same for your population. It helps sell geoengineering. These dots are not hard to connect if you really stand back and look at who benefits.
Right. And, obviously you've put together a lot of dots, you've connected a lot of pieces here. What do you think the ultimate agenda is? Do you feel that the people that are controlling, and we're going to get into a hypothetical here for a second. I mean, obviously you might not have all the white papers and data on this, but if you would please explain why you feel that these people at these top levels, these elite aristocrats that have all the money in the world and they want to use it for power or whatever, I mean, shouldn't they know? What is their ultimate agenda? Do they have some type of vaccine, do you think, or something that will allow them to live through this hell on earth that they're literally creating?
There's two aspects to this. One, in the short term, there is a facility in Germany. I've communicated directly with a Norwegian researcher that's been there. They chelate blood there. It's not available to everybody. Very expensive, very exclusive. You're on a table for over a day. Your blood completely pumped out of your system, and toxins pulled out. This is, again, not available to very many people, but that could exempt them temporarily from the buildup of these materials in their system. In an overall sense, do I think that those in power comprehend that they are going to go down with the ship too? I think they're beginning to. Now, we're talking about, again, psychopathic people, period. That's a clinical observation. That's not a metaphor. We know from clinical study of psychopathic people that there's a common thread in their various forms of psychosis, and I quote directly from the manual, a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. So that's the kind of people we're dealing with. But even then, things get to a certain point and they start to realize that they have shot themselves in the head as well, and I think we're nearing that point. So there's a lot of people that believe the power structure has everything planned out. Everything's going according to their plan. Everything is done exactly like they wanted it to be done. I don't believe that. I believe we see so many mistakes being made by the power structure, not in their favor. They're getting very sloppy. They're getting panicked, and that makes them more dangerous. So do I believe that they intended to sink the whole planet? I don't believe that. I don't. If you look at all the data all the way through, the fact that they have tried frantically to restore. In fact, 2007 was almost a crashing year for the Arctic ice, and there was a massive ramp up in spring, massive, and they miraculously expanded the surface area with shading the entire top of the globe, artificial nucleation. The whole scientific community, the cryosphere scientists, were scratching their heads at how the hell did this ice expand? It was about crashed. They're clearly not trying to melt the ice off, but in doing that, they throw the whole planet off so much that it causes heating elsewhere, an overall net loss. So in the way that they do things, it's a psychotic approach, but it's the approach that they know, and just like corrects it in the Gulf. So I don't think that they planned on sinking the whole ship. I think they thought they could go underground and ride it out. The fact is they can't. We had equilibrium periods with the last methane mass expulsion, which is the Paleocene-Eocene, 55 million years ago. Much smaller reservoir than what appears to be releasing now. 70% terrestrial extinction, 95% aquatic extinction, and equilibrium periods of 10 to 20 million years. You can't stay in a hole that long. And what we're heading for is much worse. So, again, if we don't change courses fast, and this is why I stressed to everybody who's been sitting the bench thinking they can't do anything, people can do something. They can. Absolutely everybody can. In fact, anybody listening doesn't know they might be the grain of sand that causes the scale to tip in the right direction. Anybody listening could be that grain of sand by effectively and credibly sharing data with those around you. You don't know where that chain of awakening might go, and at what point you might be the pebble that starts the avalanche that tilts the scale. Everybody can help in this equation. Everybody. Don't underestimate your own power.
Very powerful words that you say there. Where is William Wallace? Where is Leto Atreides right now? Would be nice. Hopefully
they're
that is out there. Yeah, and I think that you're on the front lines. You're certainly exposing this madness out there. You've got a great website. You've got a ton of data, And one of the things that I've really enjoyed about this hour and a half we've had here is the actual data that you brought to the table. You know, we've had some theories and some speculation as well, but you bring some true information that you pulled out, you know, white papers, et cetera. And I can definitely tell you're well versed in the subject, and all of our listeners are just absolutely on there, you know, on the edge of their seats listening to this. So I'm really glad you stayed with us for some extra time here. We all really appreciate it. If you would please, I would like you to give everybody your website again so that we can check out updates.
Couple tools. Again, geoengineeringwatch.org. It's all science, no advertising, no politics. Also, skyderalert.com. I don't know if you guys have heard of that site, but that's an interactive, downloadable link that you can photograph the trails. It will automatically send out letters to the legislatures in your area. There's a film called Look Up there, another great tool on that link. Skyderalert.com, great tool to help bring this to critical mass of awareness. And I believe if we could simply do that, if everybody got off the bench and decided that they're going to be the pebble that starts the avalanche that brings this to light, if we could bring it to light, the dominoes would fall. Populations would be foaming at the mouth. They'd be grabbing their pitchforks and torches and looking for who's responsible. It's the single greatest catalyzing issue on the planet, period. Crosses all political lines, all ideology. When everybody knows they've been a part of a grand and lethal experiment, they are not going to be okay with that. We need to reach that point, and everybody can play a part in that. So, hey, you guys, I'm very grateful for the kind of host you are. Again, it's a pleasure to have people like you out there spreading the word. I wish there were more, but hopefully our numbers are growing.
Absolutely. They're growing every single day.
A very special thank you to our guest tonight. For all of you that had the opportunity to be here with us, if you enjoyed the show, follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/clandestine-timelord, for the most recent interviews, videos, and podcasts. Or you can check us out on the World Wide Web, www.leakproject.com. Would you like to be a guest on our show? Do you have information that the world needs to see and hear? Send us an email, guestbookings@leakproject.com. Thank you, everybody. This is Rex Bear with Leak Project. Stay safe and be the change you want to see. Good night. Inside the Borg and free from the hive mind, this is Rex Bear hosting Leak Project. The Leak Project was created to offer awareness and information not found in the mainstream news. With over 90% of the world's media controlled by only 6 enormous conglomerates, many people today are looking for more accurate information. The Leak Project offers a refreshing approach to the brain-drained media. Check back daily for new content as we thrive to bring you the cutting edge in news, current events, on-scene video footage, interviews, and most importantly, the truth.
All right. Well, tonight's guest is Dane Wigington, the leading researcher for Geoengineeringwatch.org. Mr. Wigington has investigated all levels of geoengineering, from chemtrails to HAARP. He assisted Michael Murphy with his production of What in the World Are They Spraying, and has appeared on an extensive number of interviews to explain the environmental dangers we are facing right now on a global level. Dane focused his efforts and energy on the geoengineering issue when he began to lose very significant amounts of solar uptake due to ever-increasing solar obstruction caused from the aircraft spraying mass amounts of chemicals into the clouds and into the skies. He also began testing help from the forest, and his research in geoengineering will surely change your perception about what is going on right now. Dane, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rex. Very grateful that you're helping us to expose this issue that should be everybody's logical priority if we're to secure any future for ourselves and our posterity.
Well, it's pretty wicked, Dane. I'll tell you, I travel the country extensively, and everywhere I go, whether I am in South Carolina or whether I'm in Washington State, I see mass amounts of chemicals being blasted into the skies. And people used to use the excuse of, oh, those are just contrails. That's typical for any airplane. But when I started to explain to them, watch the X patterns and the checkerboard patterns, and then you'll see a blue sky turn into a very hazy, overcast sky in a matter of 15 minutes, it really started to wake some people up. So if you could tell the audience, first off, why you decided to start exposing this stuff and the research and knowledge you have behind it, and then we can move on further into exactly what it's doing and what we can do to hopefully stop it.
Well, it's certainly not a job I wanted, and I've never been involved with anything politically, never been an activist. But my background with Bechtel Power Corporation, my home on the cover of the largest renewable energy magazine, I'm completely off-grid in the woods of Northern California. So, as you mentioned before, as I started to lose so much solar power from whatever these aircraft were emitting, I mean, clearly something was going on. We have grid patterns one day and nothing the next, and the actual amount of aircraft in the air would be 10 times more on these grid pattern days. So there was a mountain of geoengineering/climate engineering data out there. And by the way, for your listeners, the semantics are really important with this issue. You want to rely on those terms, climate engineering and geoengineering, because if you're passing the data on to others, and you use the chemtrails term, leads straight to Wikipedia conspiracy theory definition. For a lot of people, that's the end of their investigation. So semantics are important, but in any event, with this mountain of data, I continued my investigation, looking for the primary elements named in numerous geoengineering patents, aluminum oxide being the most primary element. Did not want to find it in my rain, Rex. I truly didn't. I didn't want this to be what it appeared to be. But from an initial rain reading, it's tested at a state-certified lab, 7 parts per billion, and that was already high, according to local experts, hydrogeologists, given my filtered forested location. And subsequent rain tests over the next 5 years, the aluminum escalated as much as 50,000%, up to 3,450 parts per billion. So when you're faced with what can only be described as an all-out assault from the sky against everything you hold dear, the forest lands around you, the environment, your children's health, your health, what does one do? You fight. When you're standing on the end of the plank, there's nowhere else to go, nowhere to hide. You stand and be counted. So that's how I got into this battle. And for those that don't understand what climate engineering is, it's an attempt to manipulate the Earth's climate system, and the stated purpose on the great majority of the patents is SRM, solar radiation management, to try to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. The paradox is, although they can and do create large-scale cooling events, as we have seen in the eastern North American continent all winter long, it comes at the cost of a worsened overall warming. Why should this be a surprise? When the heat reflecting particles reflect both directions, it traps heat in addition to reflecting heat. So this is just simply a total runaway juggernaut of insanity, military-industrial complex. Why would we expect otherwise? The problem now is this is not just another environmental issue. The consequences will be total for life on planet Earth if these programs continue. And even if we can stop them, we have unimaginable challenges ahead. It's not just geoengineering that's harming the Earth's biosphere. Putting 90 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere a day is a problem. It's definitely a problem. Any who believe it's not a problem have not done any research. But that being said, geoengineering is a bigger problem, even bigger than the CO2, for sure. It's disabling the planet's ability to respond to the damage being done, and it's poisoning the entire web of life in the process. So you can see we're painted into quite a dark corner, Rex.
Well, it sounds quite horrific, especially the way that you're painting the picture. About a year ago, I was asking around to some of my friends in different parts of the country and, explaining to them what I was seeing and asking if they were also seeing, the X patterns, the checkerboard patterns in the sky, and they were. So the question is, if this is so detrimental on the Earth, and if it's causing forests and plants problems because of the chemicals that are being sprayed, why are they allowed to do it?
That's always the real pressing question for everybody who looks at this issue, because it's so hard for a rational mind to try to comprehend what an unrational mind will do. So if we look at past examples, when the most pristine places on the planet, South Sea Islands like the Marshall Islands, were literally taken over, the inhabitants booted out, and the islands used for absolutely lethal atomic experimentation. So here we have, again, one of the most beautiful places on the planet utterly obliterated because no one could stop them. And so, and those particular tests, and by the way, they've detonated more than 2,000 nuclear weapons on planet Earth. Everything is contaminated from that. Everything, including everybody who is orchestrating this. Those at the top, also contaminated. Can't avoid this. Strontium-90 is in all of our bones. Now we look at depleted uranium, which is used as ammunition now for the NATO countries, specifically the U.S. We've contaminated huge parts of the globe from that, contaminated forever for all practical purposes, 4.5 billion year half-life with depleted uranium. We can look at this from so many different angles. Project Starfish, which was the detonation of hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere, to see what would happen. Let's detonate absolutely unbelievable explosives in the magnetosphere to see what would happen. So we're not dealing with sanity. That's something people have to get through their mind, and also look at this from the standpoint of those in power. When they can't let go of that power, they can't get enough power. It's an addict. How many addicts do you know that can get enough of the drug? They can't. So in the course of trying to exercise this power and control, which they've had because we have a completely complacent population around the globe, populations that are fat, happy, American Idol, golfing, McDonald's, football games, they're happy. So they're happy for the moment, not for long. The Happy Meals will be going away soon. But as this complacent population has looked the other way and pretended that this wasn't their problem, now it's all of our problem. As Eisenhower warned so incredibly accurately so long ago, that the military-industrial complex would pose a dire threat. Indeed it has. And now, again, we have passed the point of no return in many aspects for the planet we've known. We're past that point. So in the course of 60-plus years of experimentation with these programs, they've done horrific damage that can't be undone in any time frame that matters. So now we're looking at trying to salvage a planet that supports life, period. It will be nothing like the planet we've known. And any who doubt this, again, I've had a lot of resistance in recent years, Rex, with people who have been confused, understandably confused, by the headlines, by the cold events back east. But people need to stand back and look at how are these cold events happening, and is the whole world as cold as the eastern U.S.? And the answer on the cold part is no. If you look at a lot of the data we post, and I post GISS maps often, where you can see the only cold place on planet Earth is eastern North America and a few spots in South America where they're geoengineering heavily as well. The rest is in meltdown. In fact, Rex, did you see the headlines from NASA from 3 days ago on the Arctic ice situation? Did you see that?
Yes, I did. Absolutely, I did.
For listeners, I'll read a headline for you right now. Grim news from NASA. West Antarctica's entire flank collapsing toward the Southern Ocean. At least 15 feet of sea level rise already locked in worldwide. That's a headline. Now, let's look at the week before. NASA's official position was max 2 feet of sea level rise in the next 100 years, max. So in a week, we went from 2 feet to 15 feet. And the 15 feet is just as ridiculous an estimate as the 2 feet, because the actual trajectory we are on is for much, much more than that. To say 15 feet is guaranteed, Rex, would be like saying if you jump off a 240-foot cliff, stop magically 15 feet down. Why would you stop? What's going to stop you? And in this case, people don't realize how much ice there is in the cryosphere. You have about 190-plus feet of potential sea level rise built into Antarctica, 21 to 24 feet in Greenland, another 10 to 15 feet in the rest of the Earth's glaciers, 230, 240 feet total, complete alteration of the coastlines around the planet. So, again, the ramifications go much further. We know that geoengineering is shredding the ozone layer. Posted an article about this today. In fact, when I first posted data on this, and anybody who has any sensitivity can tell the sun is way, way hotter than it should be. And to put that into perspective, we know.
Oh, yes, definitely.
You guys feel that? You guys have felt that, right? Okay, so, I mean, we knew it was hotter. We knew the effect from the science, available science. When you put particulates in the atmosphere, you shred ozone, period. A volcano shreds ozone, period. Particulates do this. So it causes a chlorine molecule reaction with this type of particulate that high up. So we knew it was bad. We didn't know how bad. We bought meters, state-of-the-art meters, metering in California, Maine, Oregon, New Mexico. We now know UVB levels, the more lethal band, are at least 1,200% higher than we're being told. Wow. That's not a little bit, yeah. It's burning the bark off of trees. It's killing plankton. By the way, in the plankton count, 50% down globally. Plankton supplies 50% to 60% of the Earth's oxygen content. Again, the chain reaction is huge. We're seeing, did you guys see that the anchovy fleets